Hi, my name's Callista. At my sister's birthday party, her big, glamorous, over-decorated event, she called me a useless servant. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Loud enough for the guests to laugh, and loud enough for me to finally hear it for what it really was. And that wasn't even the worst part. The truth? She'd already forged my signature, taken out a mortgage in my name, and claimed the house I'd paid for as her own. But why did I let it go on so long? Why didn't I speak up sooner? I guess when a family spends years treating you like furniture, you start believing you belong in the background. Until one day, you don't. What finally made me stop accepting it? And what did I do when I found out just how far she'd gone? You'll want to hear this. I arrived 2 hours early, just like I always did. The sun hadn't even begun to drop behind the tall pines that lined Marlene's backyard. I had a tray of lemon tarts in one hand, extra napkins in the other, and the same invisible badge I always wore when my family gathered: unpaid staff. Marlene didn't greet me at the door. She never did. She was in the middle of getting her hair curled by someone named Dahlia, who had over 200,000 followers on Instagram and called everyone babe. Her stylist was adjusting the drape of her champagne silk dress, and a photographer hovered nearby, capturing candid prep shots for the birthday post that would undoubtedly be scheduled down to the second. I slipped in through the side gate, went around to the back patio, and started unpacking platters onto the folding table I'd set up last night. Nobody noticed. Not even my mother, who was sipping her iced tea and listing Marlene's accomplishments to a neighbor from her church. "She just got featured in that Charlotte Lifestyle magazine. Front page, no less," Mom said, voice bright and proud. "And she's up for a regional branding award next month." I bent down to adjust the tablecloth. A familiar heat crawled up my neck. I'd heard that tone before, when Marlene was valedictorian, when she bought her first car, when she booked her first paid collab. Not once had she said, "Callista picked out the paint for this patio," or "Callista helped fix the water damage in the guest bathroom," or "Callista still pays half the taxes on this place because I couldn't qualify on my own." She never had to say it. No one would have listened anyway. As more guests arrived, I kept my head down. I made sure the drinks were cold, the cheese boards replenished, the decorative citronella candles were lit just enough to seem effortless, and when the time came to be introduced to someone new, a tall man with a Rolex and that slightly too white smile, I stepped forward, only to be cut off by Marlene's voice. "Oh, that's just my little helper, our full-time family servant, really." I blinked. The man chuckled awkwardly. I forced a smile. Something sour lodged in my throat, but I swallowed it like I always did. "She's joking," I muttered under my breath as I excused myself. Later that evening, the music softened and Marlene stood beneath the string lights, holding her rosé like she was about to toast the end of the world. Guests circled around her. Phones came out. Everyone leaned in. "I want to thank the incredible people who made this night possible," she said. "My glam team, my content manager, my chef for the stunning grazing table, and of course, my stylist, Dahlia." Applause, whistles. Someone shouted, "Queen!" from the back. I stood beside the patio door, holding an empty platter, having just cleared away the untouched lemon tarts I made from scratch. I wasn't mentioned, not even a glance. And yet, I smiled, because that's what I did. One of Marlene's friends, Tiffany maybe, walked past and said, "You're amazing, girl. These servers could learn from you." I wanted to laugh, but it came out like a hiccup. I walked into the kitchen, peeled off my apron, and leaned against the counter. My legs ached, my face burned. On the dessert table, the cake I'd made, a red velvet layered with cream cheese frosting and sugared raspberries, sat untouched. They were cutting into a sheet cake with her face printed on it instead. I didn't even know she'd ordered another. "This isn't new," I murmured, placing the used forks in the sink. "You've always been the one in the shadows, the one who fills glasses, folds napkins, fixes things, and gets forgotten." My phone buzzed. A notification from a work client. I swiped it away. Then I saw it. An old flagged email from a real estate attorney. Subject line, Deed, Oak Ridge Property. I'd never opened it. I hadn't wanted to stir things up back then. A guest walked in, glanced around, and looked at me. Oh, good. You're the staff, right? Could you bring out more wine? He smiled like he was being polite. I nodded, like I was being helpful. I didn't go for the wine. I went to the pantry. Inside, behind a stack of extra plates and a half-used citronella candle, I found the envelope. Beige. Faintly crumpled. Labeled in black marker, Deed, Oak Ridge Property. I picked it up slowly, as if touching it too quickly would make it vanish. My hand trembled. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't something I imagined. I whispered, barely able to hear myself over the music from outside. This isn't her house. It's mine. I slipped the envelope into my purse, tucking it behind my wallet like it was something shameful, like I was hiding a secret I hadn't even told myself. Outside the pantry, the sound of laughter drifted in waves, light and careless. As I stepped back into the crowd, the lights from the patio strung across the trees seemed too bright, too rehearsed. The air felt different, heavier. I was halfway to the dessert table when I saw him. Bryce Langford. I stopped so abruptly, someone behind me bumped into my shoulder. I murmured a quick apology, but my eyes never left him. He was standing near the edge of the yard, chatting with a group of people I didn't recognize. Tall, pressed shirt. The same quiet smile I remembered, except now it had lines around the edges. He'd aged, but not in a way that made him look tired. He looked successful. Before I could process why he was even here, Marlene spotted him. "Oh my God, Bryce! You came!" She squealed, her voice too loud for the space. Heads turned. She weaved through the guests with a practiced glide and wrapped him in a hug that lasted a few seconds too long. Then she turned to the crowd like she was presenting a prize. "Everyone, this is Bryce, my brilliant college buddy, and, well, Callista's ex-fiancé," she added with a coy grin. The sting was immediate, like salt in a paper cut. A few people chuckled, someone gasped. I didn't move, just nodded politely and kept walking toward the drink table. And then, right on cue, she added, "She's still organizing birthday parties, huh?" My spine tightened, but I didn't react. Not visibly. I grabbed a glass of lemonade I didn't want, took a sip, and set it down untouched. I heard Bryce say my name, softly, cautiously, but I walked away. I wasn't ready to see that look in his eyes. The one that said, "I thought you'd be somewhere else by now." Back inside the kitchen, I pulled the envelope from my purse. I unfolded the deed and scanned the text again, even though I already knew what it said. Oak Ridge Property, sole ownership, Callista Ray. 3 years ago. 3 years I let Marlene live here, film here, throw parties here, while I paid for termite treatments and window replacements and water bills she never opened. I remembered Dad handing me the papers before he passed. "I want you to have something of your own," he'd said, squeezing my hand. Back then, it felt too big. I wasn't ready to step out of the role they'd carved for me. It was easier to let Marlene play the part of the host, the face, the one everyone saw. I whispered, 3 years, and not once has she thanked me. The sound of my voice startled me. I rarely said anything out loud anymore, unless someone needed me to. I heard the patio door creak. Footsteps. I turned and saw Bryce in the doorway. "Hey," he said, voice gentle. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just nodded and stepped aside so he could come in. He leaned against the counter across from me, not too close. He looked uncomfortable, like someone realizing they might have misunderstood something for a very long time. "Marlene told me you were comfortable staying at home," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable," I repeated. "That's one word for unpaid labor." He gave a dry chuckle, then ran a hand through his hair. "She made it sound like you didn't want more, like you were just content where you were. She also said she was allergic to dairy for 6 years just to get out of cooking for Mom. You believe everything she says? He looked away, embarrassed. I continued. I built this party, I gave her this house, and she tells people I'm the maid. His eyes met mine. This time, he didn't look away. If I'd known, he started. But you didn't, I cut in, because you never asked. You just assumed. That's what people like you do. You see someone quiet and think that means they've got nothing to say. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left for him to say. We stood there for a moment, the silence filling every inch of the space between us. He shifted, like he might apologize again, but I turned away and began refolding the deed. I didn't need his pity. I didn't need his guilt. Outside, someone began singing Happy Birthday. The crowd joined in. Marlene's voice carried loudest, harmonizing like it was a performance. I looked out the window at all the people smiling, clapping, recording every second. Everyone out there thinks I'm lucky to be tolerated, I murmured, but they're all standing on my foundation. I slid the deed back into my purse, zipped it shut, and straightened up. No more pretending. The singing died down, replaced by the clink of glasses and the buzz of people trying to talk over one another. I stepped out of the kitchen just as someone began ushering the family toward the backyard for a group toast. I followed, not because I wanted to be part of it, but because if I didn't show up, someone would say I was being dramatic. Marlene stood at the center, a glass of something pink in her hand. The string lights caught her perfectly curled hair, and she smiled like she was living inside her own commercial. To family, she began, raising her glass, and to knowing your place in it. Some people laughed right away. A few glanced around like they weren't sure if it was meant to be a joke. My mother chuckled. A man I didn't recognize nudged me gently and whispered, "She's always been the helper, huh? Never complains." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my mouth not to betray me. I slipped away from the crowd, my heels clicking on the wooden floor of the hallway as I passed framed photos. Marlene's graduation, Marlene's bridal shower, Marlene with the mayor at a charity brunch. I opened the guest room door and walked inside. It was quieter here. Dim. The only light came from a small lamp on the dresser where the family memory wall stood like a shrine. I scanned the frames. Same faces, same smiles. And then I saw it. The birthday photo from when Marlene turned 11. I hadn't thought about that day in decades, but the image brought it all back. I'd worn a floral dress Mom pulled from a box in the attic. It didn't fit right. I'd brushed my hair down because Marlene said braids made me look too country. I had helped decorate the porch with balloons that popped before noon. And then, when it was time to take the group photo, Mom had turned to me and said, "This one's just for Marlene's friends, sweetheart. You'll understand." I didn't argue. I just stepped aside. Looking at that picture now, I realized she was right. I did understand. Even back then, I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Not for nostalgia, just as a reminder of what being invisible actually looked like. I left the room and walked to the kitchen. The voices outside were muffled, giving me a moment to breathe. I opened the cabinet beneath the microwave, half expecting to find a mess of old extension cords. Instead, I found my laptop. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust layered the keys, and the charging cable was curled like an afterthought. I plugged it in, more out of muscle memory than hope, and waited for the screen to flicker. When it finally came to life, it opened to a folder labeled Senior Portfolio. My name sat on each draft. The thumbnails showed designs I had poured myself into. Layouts, product mock-ups, branding ideas. One project had been inspired by a textile pattern from my grandmother's old quilts. Another borrowed colors from the wild hydrangeas that lined our street. I hadn't opened this folder since the week I turned down the scholarship to Colorado. Senior year, full ride. A place to go and make something of myself. But then Marlene had shown up, baby in tow, crying in the kitchen while Mom hovered around her like a nurse in a hospital drama. No job, no husband. Just excuses and, how could this happen? Looks passed between them, like I wasn't even in the room. Mom had pulled me aside 2 days later. "You're the calm one," she said. "You'll understand. We need you here." What she meant was, "You're the one we can guilt without pushback." So I gave up the scholarship. I told myself I'd reapply later, after the baby started school, after things settled. But things never settle in this family. They just reshape themselves around the people who scream the loudest. I opened one of the design files. It took a moment to load, but there it was. Clean, sharp, with notes I barely recognized as my own handwriting. The door creaked behind me, but I didn't turn around. Whoever it was, they could wait. I stared at the screen. My screen. And I whispered. It could have been me. But I stayed. I didn't cry. There was no need for tears. Not anymore. I closed the laptop lid and leaned back, hands folded in my lap. A long, steady breath left me like it had been waiting to exhale for years. I stood there, phone in hand, thumb hovering over send. A quiet came over me, not the kind that leaves you alone, but the kind that demands you listen. I didn't send the email, not yet. I closed the screen, slipped the phone into my bag, and walked back toward the patio. One step at a time. My head felt clearer than it had in years, like a fog was finally lifting. By the time I returned, the formal toast was already underway. They'd rearranged the seating into a long table setup, string lights overhead and glassware shimmering like everything was perfectly in place. Because that's what Marlene knew how to do. Make things look good from a distance. Place cards sat neatly on every setting. I scanned the line, walking slowly, not because I was unsure of where to sit, but because I wanted to see. There it was. Third seat from the right, beside my cousin Cheryl, was a name tag that should have read Callista. It didn't. Instead, it said Cheryl M. Mine had been replaced. I paused, fingertips brushing the edge of the card. She hadn't forgotten. She'd chosen not to include me. The servers were seated at the folding table near the fence, eating small plates with one another in the dim evening light. They had a seat. I didn't. I stepped back from the table and moved toward the hedge line, staying just close enough to hear the toast. "To family," Marlene called, lifting her glass. "And to knowing your place in it." A few people chuckled. A few looked confused. My mother raised her glass without hesitation. Someone patted my arm as they walked by and said, "You always know how to make things work. You've got a gift." I nodded, even though I wanted to scream. I stood alone for most of it, watching them clink glasses, kiss cheeks, pass around compliments like they were mints. Even the kids got more acknowledgement than I had. It wasn't until Bryce walked over that anyone noticed I was missing. "You didn't get a seat?" he asked quietly, scanning the table behind me. I gave him a small smile, flat, without warmth. "Not tonight, not most nights." He opened his mouth, as if about to explain something that didn't need explaining, then closed it again. "I didn't know. About the house, about the bills, about you turning down school." I met his eyes, calm. "You didn't ask. You never asked. You just took Marlene's word for it." He looked down. "I thought you were content. I figured you wanted this kind of life." I tilted my head. "You figured wrong, but you're not the only one." He looked like he wanted to apologize again, but I didn't give him the chance. "We all would have made different choices if we'd known better," I said. "Hindsight's easy. Living with the consequences is the real work." That shut him up. I left him standing there and walked inside, my footsteps lighter than they had any right to be. I wasn't carrying guilt anymore. I'd set it down. The kitchen was quieter now. Most of the caterers were outside cleaning up, and the smell of heated trays and melted butter still hung in the air. I found my mother near the sink, inspecting the coffee carafes. She was fussing over the labels like they were going to be reviewed in a magazine spread. I cleared my throat softly. "Why didn't I have a seat?" I asked. She didn't even look at me. "Don't start. Not tonight." "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I'm asking a question." She sighed. as if the weight of my presence was somehow heavier than the years I'd spent keeping her house intact. "This isn't about you," she snapped. "This is your sister's night. You always find a way to make it about yourself." That was it. "That's rich," I said. "Considering I gave her the house this party's being held in. Considering I've paid the taxes, paid the repairs, and made sure you never missed a prescription." She finally looked up, but not with remorse, just irritation. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done being silent." She looked away again, waving me off with a flick of her hand. "It's always been Marlene. You were always different. You never needed the attention." I studied her face, trying to find the version of her I'd once run to for comfort, but she wasn't there. Maybe she never had been. "It's never been my day, has it?" I asked. She didn't answer. She turned her back and started rinsing out the coffee pot. I caught my reflection in the cabinet door. My arms still held tension. My eyes looked tired, but something in my stance had changed. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't shrinking anymore. Outside, the party was winding down. The music softened into something instrumental, unmemorable. The lighting dimmed a little. People started to check their watches, gather their purses. I stepped out for air, letting the breeze brush against my face as I leaned against the porch railing. I noticed Bryce watching me from across the yard. He didn't approach this time. Maybe he'd finally realized that not every silence was an invitation. I pulled out my phone, opened the draft to the property lawyer, and hovered over the button. This time, I didn't hesitate. After sending the message, I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the screen, stood up from the porch railing, and walked inside. Past the folding chairs being stacked, past the catering trays going cold, past my sister's laughter echoing through the speakers like nothing had happened. But something had. I had changed, and they hadn't noticed yet. I made my way upstairs. The hallway to my childhood bedroom still creaked the same way it did when I was 13, sneaking back from midnight kitchen raids. I hadn't stepped into that room since the day Dad's things were boxed up. When I opened the door, the scent hit me first. Old cedar, dried lavender, and the faint smell of printer ink. The walls hadn't changed. The posters were gone, but the outlines where they once hung were still faintly visible. The desk in the corner still held a chipped corner I'd covered with a sticker that read, "Let her speak." I crossed the room and pulled open the bottom drawer. The envelope was there, exactly where he'd left it. "Callista, open this if you ever feel like you've been erased." His handwriting was unmistakable, strong, slanted slightly to the left. I sat down on the edge of the bed and tore the flap open. Inside was a letter and a notarized property transfer. It was dated a few months before Dad died. Everything was official, documented, clear. The Oak Ridge house was mine. Signed over not because I asked, but because he saw something no one else had cared to see. "I know you won't ask for it," the letter read, "but you've carried this family without credit. You deserve something that's yours." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I folded the letter, slipped it into my purse beside the deed, and stood up straighter than I had in years. I wasn't hiding this time, not from them, not from myself. Downstairs, the party had picked up again. Marlene's voice filtered through the air like bad perfume. Loud, lingering, and hard to ignore. I took the long route back to the patio, walking past the side garden, behind the shrubs where the projection equipment was set up for the big finale. The DJ's voice came over the speakers. "All right, folks, we've got a special video tribute for the birthday girl. Sit tight, this one's a tearjerker." Guests gathered near the screen. Marlene sat in the front row, hands folded delicately in her lap, like she was about to accept an award. I stayed behind, near the hedge, out of view. The screen flickered. Instead of the polished tribute her assistant had curated, another video began to play. I knew it well. I'd received it anonymously weeks ago. No subject line, just a link. A friend of Marlene's, maybe former friend now, had sent it. It had been filmed on a phone, audio grainy but clear. Marlene's voice filled the air. I don't need Callista to be seen. She's just background, you know? Some people were made to be the help. Gasps, real, audible ones. She appeared on screen, pacing in her dressing room, still in her robe, hair half done. Honestly, if she disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice. Especially not Mom. Silence. As if someone had sucked all the air out of the garden. I stepped forward, just enough to be visible. Marlene turned, her face pale under the patio lights. For once, she didn't have a comeback ready. That was taken out of context, she stammered. I tilted my head, keeping my voice steady. Out of context? Should I play the rest? She stared at me like I had betrayed her. That was the irony of it. She truly believed she was the one betrayed. You think you're better than me now? She snapped. No, I said calmly. I've always been better than the version of me you told people about. The crowd didn't move. Some shifted awkwardly. One of the aunts who never liked me nodded slowly, like she'd just realized she'd been clapping for the wrong daughter all this time. Marlene stood up, smoothing her dress like it could help her recover control. You're trying to humiliate me. That's what this is. I'm not trying, I replied. You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it. She blinked. A second later, she stormed off the patio, heels clacking down the steps and out of sight. No one followed her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I walked over to the table where the projector stood and picked up my bag. Then, with one final glance toward the house I'd been written out of too many times, I texted Avery. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Let's move forward. The message delivered. Then marked read. Grant was still in the doorway when I sent the message. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. His eyes followed me as I stepped past him and walked back toward the yard, where the guests were lingering, unsure of what to do with themselves now that Marlene had vanished, and the party's perfect surface had cracked in front of them. Some tried to act casual, hovering near the dessert table or refilling their drinks, but most just kept glancing toward me, waiting, maybe, to see what I'd do next. I didn't make them wait long. Marlene's voice came from the far end of the yard, too loud, too cheerful. All right, folks, time for cake. Let's not let one little hiccup ruin the mood. I walked to the center of the patio, right where she'd stood earlier to give her toast. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. This party is over, I said, calm, steady, unapologetic. And I suggest you all leave, unless you've come to thank the actual host. It took a second for the meaning to register. A murmur rippled through the guests. A woman near the drink station whispered, Wait, this is her house? Someone else responded, Are you serious? I thought it was Marlene's. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. I stood with my arms crossed as the silence grew thick. Marlene froze mid-sentence, cupcake in hand, halfway toward her daughter. Her mouth tightened. She's being dramatic. Don't mind her. But it was already too late. Guests began gathering their bags, saying awkward goodbyes. Some didn't even make eye contact. Within minutes, the once-packed yard had emptied into quiet rustles of footsteps, muted car engines, and the occasional nervous laugh as people retreated. I didn't enjoy it, but I did feel relief. Back inside, I walked past the photo wall and into the guest room, where I'd set up the backup projection system earlier in the day. I plugged in the second flash drive. The file loaded quickly. On screen appeared Marlene, caught by a phone camera in her prep room the day before the party. She held the clay sculpture I'd made for the centerpiece, delicate, hand-painted with floral patterns from our grandmother's old china. She's not getting credit for this, Marlene muttered in the video, adjusting her robe and glancing toward the mirror. It's my moment. And then, without hesitation, she let it fall. The crash of ceramic echoed in the clip, followed by her laugh, sharp, proud, like she'd just won a game no one else knew they were playing. I let the footage play, even though the room was empty. I wasn't doing it for witnesses anymore. I was doing it because I needed to see it again. To remind myself this wasn't in my head. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't creating drama. I turned off the projector and shut down the system, Then I walked to the kitchen. Grant sat at the island, shoulders slightly hunched, a glass of untouched water in front of him. He didn't look up as I approached, but he didn't move away either. I placed the manila folder on the counter between us. "This is a mortgage agreement," I said. $180,000. Taken out using my name, signed with a forgery. He looked up then, his expression slow to shift, from confusion to understanding to disbelief. "I stayed quiet about this," I continued, "because I didn't want to make things worse, because I thought, maybe, if I just kept doing the right thing, they'd eventually see it." He nodded once, barely perceptible. "But they didn't," I said, "and now there will be consequences." Behind us, footsteps. Marlene re-entered the kitchen, arms folded, face already twisted in preemptive denial. "You're bluffing," she snapped. "There's no way I could have." I turned toward her. "Then sue me." It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely stunned. Not offended, not defensive, just quiet. She glanced toward Grant, but he didn't meet her eyes. "I didn't do anything illegal," she said, but her voice was weaker now, uncertain. "We're family. Families borrow. That's what people do." I opened my bag again, pulled out one more folder, and handed it to Grant. "If you care about your daughter, you'll want to know exactly what her mother's willing to risk behind closed doors." He took it. His hands shook. Marlene stared at me, her jaw tight. "This is about revenge." "No," I said. "This is about truth. You can lie to everyone else. But I'm done lying to myself." For a long moment, none of us moved. The kitchen, once filled with the aroma of catered food and quiet judgments, now felt colder, honest. I turned and walked away, not waiting for her to answer. The house felt different the next morning, quieter, more hollow, like the echoes inside it were finally catching up to the years of things left unsaid. I parked down the block, walked up the front steps with my hair still wet from the shower and no makeup on. I wasn't there to impress anyone. Avery's office sat in a brick building just off Main Street. No gold-plated signs, no unnecessary posturing, just clean lines, firm handshakes, and facts. She was waiting for me inside, seated behind her desk, her sleeves rolled up, and a legal pad already halfway full. She didn't ask me how I was. I appreciated that. She slid a folder across the table. We verified the documents. The signature was lifted from an old tax form, matched against your past filings. The loan was filed using that forgery. I didn't blink. "So it's clear?" "As daylight," she said. "This isn't just a moral failure. It's fraud, state and federal." My fingers tapped the edge of the folder once, then stilled. "If this goes to court," she added, "she's not just looking at a lost house. Depending on how she responds to discovery, it could escalate." I met her eyes. "I don't want a circus." Avery nodded. "Then we move quickly. Filing begins today." Outside her office, I stood on the sidewalk and let the sun warm my shoulders. The breeze had a bite to it. Fall was coming. I checked my phone. No new messages from Marlene. Not that I expected one. That evening, I returned to the house, not to argue, not to fight, but to gather the rest of my things. I'd left behind boxes of files, a few personal belongings, and my father's old journals. When I stepped inside, the place looked untouched, staged, a home where nothing had ever been wrong. But sitting in the front room was Dr. Lucien Baer. His cane rested against his knee, and a cup of tea steamed on the side table. Edwina sat across from him, her hands folded tightly like she was praying he'd fix something. "Callista," Lucien said, standing with effort. "I heard what happened. I came because, well, some things need to be said out loud." I nodded slowly, unsure of what he meant. Edwina barely looked at me. "He doesn't need to get involved." "She's still your daughter," Lucien said to her, then turned to me. "I've watched this family from a distance for years, sat at your holiday tables, donated to your fundraisers, Showed up to birthday parties with gifts I picked carefully for people who barely looked up. He took a slow sip of tea before continuing. But I never once saw you, Callista, treated as though you belonged. I didn't say anything. I let the weight of his words land in the room. You raised this household. You kept the roof standing, literally and figuratively, and all you got in return was silence. The silence between your mother's praises for Marlene. The silence in family photos where your seat was always just out of frame. Edwina shifted, the tightness in her face trembling for a second. You don't know the full story. I know enough, he said gently, and so does she. I looked at my mother. She stared at the floor. Lucian touched my arm. If you choose to fight, do it with the knowledge that your life has always mattered, even if this house never told you that. I nodded once, throat tight. Later that night, after Lucian had gone, a courier arrived with a cream envelope and a familiar return address. Avery Quist. Grant answered the door, took the delivery, and read the front before handing it to Marlene. What's this? She asked, already annoyed. Summons, he said. She tore it open, skimmed the first paragraph, then the second. Her breath hitched. This is insane. She's suing me? She's pressing for civil penalties and asset recovery, he said evenly. You forged her name. Her hands shook. I didn't forge anything. I mean, look, it was just paperwork. It wasn't like I stole from a stranger. That's exactly what makes it worse, Grant replied. You stole from your sister. Marlene's voice cracked. I gave her something to do. I gave her a life. What was she going to be without me? Some sad, dusty sidekick with a Pinterest board and no audience? He didn't respond. In the hallway, their daughter Sienna peeked from behind the door. Her eyes wide, her mouth tight. She'd heard enough to know something was unraveling. Marlene saw her, and for a second, her defiance wavered. She looked in the mirror hanging beside the coat rack and paused, just long enough to register what was staring back at her. Not a victim, not a star. Just a woman who'd finally lost the script. The next morning, I checked my email. There it was. Avery's message. Her team offered mediation. They want to avoid public filings. I replied instantly. Only if she admits it. In writing, in public. Then I closed the laptop and sat back. Because some truths don't need revenge. They just need light. The email was sent. No hesitation this time, no shaky fingers. I closed the laptop and set it aside, knowing exactly what that message meant. Avery would move swiftly, and Marlene's team, if they had any common sense, would stop pretending this was a misunderstanding and start treating it like the legal crisis it was. A few hours later, the sky was shifting into dusk. I stood at the kitchen sink in my own apartment, rinsing a mug that had once belonged to Dad. On the rim, a tiny chip where he used to rest his thumb. I hadn't noticed it until the day we packed his things. Funny what you start seeing when people stop talking. My phone buzzed. I dried my hands and picked it up. Avery. They're asking for mediation. Press wants a statement. We move when you're ready. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stepped onto my small balcony and watched a few teenagers play basketball in the park across the street. One kid missed a shot and laughed at himself. No drama, no scene. Just an honest moment of being human. Back inside, I typed out a reply. Only if she admits it. In writing, in public. Then I sent it. The next morning, I was scheduled for a video call with Avery and a few members of Marlene's legal team. But first, I had something else to do. The community center downtown wasn't glamorous. Beige walls, flickering overhead lights, chairs that creaked when you shifted your weight. But it held something far more valuable. Accountability. I arrived just before 9. The place was mostly empty, save for a few early risers and a receptionist sipping coffee from a world's okayest employee mug. I gave her my name, and she waved me toward room 3. Inside, a panel had been set up. 3 mediators, neutral but attentive, and one small video screen where Marlene would join remotely. She hadn't dared to show up in person. Avery was already there, seated beside me, folders neatly stacked, posture unflinching. I sat straighter just because she did. The screen came to life. Marlene's face appeared. Hair pulled back too tightly, makeup layered just enough to look natural. She wore white. Of course she did. I almost laughed. "Ms. Dorr," one of the mediators began, "we're here to facilitate a resolution between you and Ms. Ray. Let's begin with your statement." Marlene cleared her throat. "First of all, I never intended for things to get this far. This was a family matter, private, and I don't think legal action was ever necessary." Avery leaned forward. "The forgery was necessary?" Marlene flushed. "It wasn't forgery. It was expediency. Callista wasn't using the house. She said—" "I never said that," I interrupted. Calm, clear. "And if this isn't a real apology, we're done." There was a long pause. The mediator looked toward Marlene. "Ms. Dorr, would you like to revise your statement?" Marlene's jaw twitched. "I, Marlene Dorr," she began reluctantly, "acknowledge that I used my sister's name without consent to secure a mortgage loan. I misrepresented her involvement, and in doing so, I overstepped both legal and ethical boundaries. It wasn't warm, it wasn't heartfelt, but it was public, it was recorded. I didn't need more. The mediators moved to the settlement terms. I signed my end, then closed the file. It was done. As Avery and I walked out, she looked at me. "How do you feel?" Like I just turned off a noise that's been running in the background for 15 years. That night, I returned to the house one last time. Not for confrontation, just closure. I parked in front, knocked, and waited. It was Grant who answered. "She's not here," he said. "I'm not here for her." He opened the door and let me in. The place felt smaller than I remembered, quieter. I walked past the living room, past the hallway full of photos I wasn't in, and into the back office, once Dad's, now mostly empty. On the desk was a shoebox labeled "For Callista," in Grant's handwriting. Inside were old receipts, a flash drive, and a note. "I should have spoken up sooner, but I see you now, and so does Sienna." I folded the note and tucked it into my purse. As I was about to leave, Sienna came down the stairs, holding a school project. "Is it true?" she asked. I looked at her, that same hesitation in her eyes I'd seen in the mirror for years. "It's true," I said gently, "but it's over now." She nodded slowly, then hugged me without another word. The moment I stepped outside, the wind picked up, sending dried leaves skittering across the porch. I stood there for a minute. Then I opened my phone, navigated to the Department of State licensing website, and resumed the application I'd left unfinished a decade ago. The cursor blinked at me. I clicked submit. Because this time, I wasn't building for anyone else. The submission confirmation hit my inbox around 9:07 a.m., just as I was pouring coffee into the same ceramic mug I'd used for years, the one with a small chip on the handle and a fading bluebird near the rim. I didn't smile. Not exactly, but something softened in me, like an old knot loosening in my chest. By noon, the first headlines began to trickle in. Local influencer sued by sister for mortgage fraud. I was erased. Callista Ray speaks out. Sister versus sister, when branding goes too far. I wasn't refreshing news pages. I wasn't scrolling for comments. But I was aware of them. You can feel it when your name becomes public property. Except this time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. By late afternoon, Marlene's PR firm released a statement. It was brief, careful, designed to pacify. Ms. Dorr regrets any misunderstandings and has taken steps to address family matters privately. No apology, no accountability, just damage control. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But then, a friend forwarded me a screenshot. A major sponsor, one of Marlene's biggest, had dropped her. "We believe in ethical partnerships. Trust matters." It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. That evening, Avery called. "They've settled. Full retraction. Public apology pending. You'll receive the draft before it goes live." I thanked her, then set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me hadn't allowed for this outcome. Somewhere between the trauma and the routines I built around it, I stopped imagining justice could be quiet. But it can be. That night, I sat down with a copy of the local print paper, just to hold the ink in my hands. The front page didn't carry the story, but page 7 did. And there it was. A pull quote in bold. I gave her the house. She gave me erasure. Callista Ray. I read it once, then folded the page, not out of pride, but preservation. Sienna had her first school debate that week. I showed up early, sat in the third row, and watched her speak with a poise that made me ache. When she caught sight of me, she didn't smile right away. Instead, she gave me a nod. Subtle, but full of something that felt like understanding. Afterward, in the hallway, she walked beside me in silence until we reached the exit. My teacher asked what inspires me, she said softly. I said you. I didn't know how to answer, so I squeezed her hand. Later that week, I stopped by the old house, not for confrontation, not even for closure, just to see. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown. A for sale sign leaned slightly to one side. I walked up to the porch, paused in front of the door where I used to hang seasonal wreaths, and set down a small package. Inside, a copy of the deed. A note. You once told me I didn't know my place. Turns out I do. It just isn't here. Back at my apartment, I hung a new nameplate outside my studio door. Ray & Co. Creative design. No pretense. No borrowed names. No more giving my voice away. I spent the next few days organizing, setting up consultations, calling old contacts from school who still remembered my senior project. One even said, "It's about time." When the apology from Marlene finally went live, I didn't watch the video. I didn't need to hear her voice tremble through scripted regret. I skimmed the transcript just once. It ended with, "To my sister, I'm sorry. I took what wasn't mine, and I let silence do the rest." I closed the tab. The mail arrived that afternoon. Among it, a small envelope from Lucian Bear. No return address, just my name in strong cursive. Inside, a photograph. Me, age 16, crouched near a folding table at a backyard party, adjusting a tablecloth while Marlene posed near a cake. I didn't know anyone had taken it. Tucked behind the photo was a torn scrap of yellowed paper. My father's handwriting, unmistakable. You never needed the spotlight, but that doesn't mean you didn't earn it. I held the photo for a long time, not to mourn it, just to own it. Later that night, I stood on my own porch, tea in hand, cool air brushing past my shoulders. A car slowed at the curb. Marlene's. She didn't get out. She didn't wave. I didn't either. Because some stories don't end with reunion. Some end with someone walking away, quietly, finally, into something they built for themselves.